What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be looking at an article by Mr. V for Victory himself, Winston Churchill, uh, entitled Zionism versus Bolshevism. This is an article that was first published by the Illustrated Sunday Herald, February 8th, 1920. This is about a month after the establishment of the League of Nations in the aftermath of the Great War in Europe. And at this time, Winston Churchill himself was in a sort of early stage of his political career. He was the Secretary of State for War and Air, and was a big supporter of the League of Nations cause, but was somewhat unique in that he was opposed to the sort of radical demobilization of the German army because he saw the Soviet threat to be a pretty major problem. And in fact, I think had troops deployed to assist in the Civil War, in the Russian Civil War, to support the White Army, at least for a period of time. And in this article, Churchill exhibits, I think, a pretty accurate understanding of what brought about the Soviet problem in Russia. But what's interesting here is you get this idea that, well, I'll just kind of spoil the content of the article. He makes this distinction between three kinds of Jews. The first is the national Jew. And the national Jew is the Jew that is situated in some particular nation state, some particular country, some particular territory, and works, identifies himself among his countrymen and works toward the sort of aims of the sort of popular aims of that country. He does not participate in usury. He does not engage in any kind of, any activity that we might put under the heading of international Jewry, which is this second category that he introduces. And I mean, I'm sure I don't need to elaborate on what that is. The third category that he introduces is the Zionist Jew. And the Zionist Jew, well, you can see down here he has this section entitled "Good and Bad Jews," and we'll read through this. That's what I'm going to do here in a moment. But he says that the good Jews are the national Jews and the Zionist Jews, and they are against the international Jews. And so you get this idea that Zionism, the idea of establishing a nation state for the Jewish people, is somehow opposed to international Jewry. And this is an idea that, I mean, it still continues to exist in some form or another today, even. But it's, the idea is that this is opposed to, opposed in spirit and in practice to Bolshevism. So it's an interesting and strange kind of assumption to make. Of course, the establishment of a nation state, there's nothing about the establishment of the nation state that is inherently opposed to internationalism or hegemony of any kind, imperialism. In fact, nationalism is often, nationalists, once they get their nation state, or they achieve whatever their sort of goals are pertaining to the nation state, whatever domestic policy that might be, or whatever foreign policy that might consist of, they're often involved in creating and maintaining colonies. So it's just not true that like nationalism and any form of hegemony, imperialism, internationalism, etc., that they're not like that they're in any way intrinsically opposed. In fact, quite the opposite seems to be true very often. And of course, I'm sure that I don't need to make the argument that Zionism and international Jewry are very deeply connected. Um, maybe I don't know. Maybe if that argument needs to be made, I can make that on some other occasion. But it's an interesting thing here that he kind of sets up this sort of parody. So we're going to start just reading through this. Some people like Jews and some do not, but no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are beyond all question the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. Disraeli, the Jew Prime Minister of England and leader of the Conservative Party, who was always true to his race and proud of his origin, said on a well-known occasion, "The Lord deals with the nations as the nations deal with the Jews." Certainly, when we look at the miserable state of Russia, where of all countries in the world, the Jews were the most cruelly treated, and contrast it with the fortunes of our own country, which seems to have been so providentially preserved amid the awful perils of these times, we must admit that nothing has since happened in the history of the world, that nothing that has since happened in the history of the world has falsified the truth of Disraeli's confident assertion. So, just this idea that pogroms randomly happen. Also, not really talking too much about the history of like what forces brought the Jews back into England, rather, or why they were exiled to begin with. So rather strange assertions. Good and bad Jews. The conflict between good and evil, which proceeds unceasingly in the breast of man, nowhere reaches such an intensity as in the Jewish race. The dual nature of mankind is nowhere more strongly or more terribly exemplified. We owe to the Jews in the Christian revelation a system of ethics which, even if it were entirely separated from the supernatural, would be incomparably the most precious possession of mankind, worth in fact the fruits of all other wisdom and learning put together. On that system and by that faith there has been built out of the wreck of the Roman Empire the whole of our existing civilization. And it may well be that this same astounding race may at the present time be in the actual process of producing another system of morals and philosophy as malevolent as Christianity was benevolent, which, if not arrested, would shatter irretrievably all that Christianity has rendered possible. It would almost seem as if the gospel of Christ and the gospel of Antichrist were destined to originate among the same people. It would almost seem. And that this mystic and mysterious race had been chosen for the supreme manifestations both of the divine and the diabolical. So now he's going to begin to make his threefold distinction of Jews. National Jews. There could be no greater mistake than to attribute to each individual a recognizable share in the qualities which make up the national character. There are all sorts of men, good, bad, and for the most part indifferent, in every country and in every race. Nothing is more wrong than to deny to an individual on account of race or origin his right to be judged on his personal merits and conduct. In a people of peculiar genius like the Jews, contrasts are more vivid, the extremes are more widely separated, the resulting consequences are more decisive. I find that to be mostly agreeable. At the present fateful period, there are three main lines of political conception among the Jews, two of which are helpful and hopeful in a very high degree to humanity, and the third absolutely destructive. First, there are Jews dwelling in every country throughout the world. First, there are Jews who, dwelling in every country throughout the world, identify themselves with that country, enter into its national life, and, while adhering faithfully to their own religion, regard themselves as citizens in the fullest sense of the state which has received them. Such a Jew living in England would say, I am an Englishman practicing the Jewish faith. This is a worthy conception and useful in the highest degree. We in Great Britain well know that during the great struggle the influence of what may be called the national Jews in many lands was cast preponderately on the side of the Allies. And in our own army, Jewish soldiers have played a most distinguished part, some rising to the command of armies, others winning the Victoria Cross for valor. The national Russian Jews, in spite of the disabilities under which they have suffered, have managed to play an honorable and useful part in the national life even of Russia. As bankers and industrialists, they have strenuously promoted the development of Russia's economic resources, and they were foremost in the creation of those remarkable organizations, the Russian cooperative societies. In politics, their support has been given for the most part to liberal and progressive movements, and they have been among the staunchest upholders of friendship with France and Great Britain. So this idea of the national Jew, I am an Englishman practicing the Jewish faith. What comes to mind is this bit that's from Karl Marx's essay on the Jewish question, his response to Bruno Bauer, where he says that something to the effect of, insofar as the Christians have accepted insofar as the Jews have been accepted by the Christians have become Jewish. And I think that, the essence of the Jewish religion, if you try to define Judaism positively, Judaism posits really only a central negation of the Christian religion. Really, the only way to be seen as divorced from Israel is to be baptized. So I think that really that's the only kind of like essential thing to being a Jew. You do not even need to believe in God. You don't have to be any kind of classical theist or Maimonidean to be a Jew. You can be a pantheist. You can be an atheist. And Jewish atheism has its own very unique sort of particular expressions in the form of Bolshevism in particular. But those are, fundamentally, Trotsky is still a Jew. Like, Trotsky is unbaptized. Trotsky would have to be seen as sort of like on the periphery of Israel. So, this idea of the national Jew, it's not as if Jews can't or don't contribute anything to their host nations while still continuing to practice their religion. But I guess the question is, like, to what extent are they deep in the roots of their religion? To what extent are they, firmly rooted in their religion? And I mean, many of these like, I am an Englishman practicing the Jewish faith. I mean, Disraeli, I don't really know too much about Disraeli's private practice of Judaism, but I have to imagine that he was some kind of conservative Jew. He was some kind of post-Enlightenment Jew. So, that is kind of a that's kind of a compromise. I think that this is basically what happens with a lot of these so-called national Jews. They make these even a Ben Shapiro type. Well, I don't know. He's pretty aggressively Zionist, and well, anyways, maybe he's not the best example, but I mean, even him, like, you see that there is this sort of this sort of compromise with his Jewish identity. There is a sort of not going in all the way, right? And he, he likes to break bread with Christians, um, and I think that you could probably suggest that there are reasons why he likes to do that. Why is he interested in manipulating the Christians that he breaks bread with that work for his media organization? Anyways, um, let's move on to the next section. International Jews. In violent opposition to all this sphere of Jewish effort rise the schemes of the international Jews. The adherents of this sinister confederacy are mostly men reared up among the unhappy populations of countries where Jews are persecuted on account of their race. Most, if not all, of them have forsaken the faith of their forefathers and divorced from their minds and spiritual hopes of the next world. Minds all spiritual hopes of the next world, I should say. This movement among Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to, he's talking about Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played, as a modern writer, Mrs. Webster, has so ably shown, a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. So, I mean, that almost sounds like something from Mein Kampf, And this is what's so interesting about this article is that he makes these kinds of observations, but for some reason he's so trusting of Zionism. He sort of interprets Zionism very much at face value. Terrorist Jews. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and, for the most part, atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders. Thus, Churchill, a pure Russian, is eclipsed by his nominal subordinate Litvinov, and the influence of Russians like Bukharin and Lunacharsky cannot be compared with the power of Trotsky or Zinoviev, the dictator of the Red Citadel, or of Krasin or Radek, all Jews. In the Soviet institutions, the predominance of Jews is even more astounding, and the prominent, if not indeed the principal part in the system of terrorism applied by the extraordinary commissions for combating counter-revolution has been taken by Jews and in some notable cases by Jewesses. The same evil prominence was obtained by Jews in the brief period of terror during which Bela Kun ruled in Hungary. The same phenomenon has been presented in Germany, especially in Bavaria, so far as this madness has been allowed to prey upon the temporary prostration of the German people. Although in all these countries there are many non-Jews, every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing. Protectors of the Jews. Needless to say, the most intense passions of revenge have been excited in the breasts of the Russian people. Wherever General Denikin's authority could reach, protection was always accorded to the Jewish population, and strenuous efforts were made by his officers to prevent reprisals and to punish those guilty of them. So much was this the case that the Petlerist propaganda against General Denikin denounced him as a protector of the Jews. The Mrs. Healy, nieces of Mr. Tim Healy, in relating their personal experiences in Kiev, have declared to their knowledge, on more than one occasion, officers who committed offenses against Jews were reduced to the ranks and sent out of the city to the front. But the hordes of brigands by whom the whole vast expanse of the Russian Empire is becoming infested do not hesitate to gratify their lust for blood and for revenge at the expense of the innocent Jewish population whenever an opportunity occurs. The brigand Makhno, the hordes of Petlura and of Grigoriev, who signalize their every success by the most brutal massacres, everywhere found among the half-stupefied, half-infuriated population an eager response to anti-Semitism in its worst and foulest forms. The fact that in many cases Jewish interests and Jewish places of worship are accepted by the Bolsheviks from their universal hostility has tended more and more to associate the Jewish race in Russia with the villainies which are now being perpetrated. This is an injustice on millions of helpless people, most of whom are themselves sufferers from the revolutionary regime. It becomes therefore especially important to foster and develop any strongly marked Jewish movement which leads directly away from these fatal associations. And it is here that Zionism has such a deep significance for the whole world at the present time. A home for Jews. Zionism offers the third sphere to the political conceptions of the Jewish race. In violent contrast to international communism, it presents to the Jew a national idea of a commanding character. It has fallen to the British government, as the result of the conquest of Palestine, to have the opportunity and the responsibility of securing for the Jewish race all over the world a home and a center of national life. The statesmanship and historic sense of Mr. Balfour were prompt to seize this opportunity. Declarations have been made which have irrevocably decided the policy of Great Britain. The fiery energies to Dr. Weizmann, the leader for practical purposes of the Zionist project, backed by many of the most prominent British Jews and supported by the full authority of Lord Allenby, are all directed to achieving the success of this inspiring movement. Of course, Palestine is far too small to accommodate more than a fraction of the Jewish race, nor do the majority of national Jews wish to go there. But if, as may well happen, there should be created in our own lifetime by the banks of the Jordan a Jewish state under the protection of the British Crown, which might comprise 3 or 4 millions of Jews, an event which would have occurred in the history of the world, which would, from every point of view, be beneficial and would be especially in harmony with the truest interests of the British Empire. Zionism has already become a factor in the political convulsions of Russia as a powerful competing influence in Bolshevik circles with the international communistic system. Nothing could be more significant than the fury with which Trotsky has attacked the Zionists generally, and Dr. Weizmann in particular. The cruel penetration of his mind leaves him in no doubt that his schemes of a worldwide communistic state under Jewish domination are directly thwarted and hindered by this new ideal, which directs the energies and the hopes of Jews in every land toward a simpler, a truer, and a far more attainable goal. The struggle which is now beginning between the Zionist and Bolshevik Jews is little less than a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. Duty of loyal Jews. It is particularly important in these circumstances that the national Jews in every country who are loyal to the land of their adoption should come forward on every occasion, as many of them in England have already done, and take a prominent part in every measure for combating the Bolshevik conspiracy. In this way, they will be able to vindicate the honor of the Jewish name and make it clear to all the world that the Bolshevik movement is not a Jewish movement, but is repudiated vehemently by the great mass of the Jewish race. But a negative resistance to Bolshevism in any field is not enough. Positive and practicable alternatives are needed in the moral as well as the social sphere, and in building up with the utmost possible rapidity a Jewish national center in Palestine, which may become not only a refuge to the oppressed from the unhappy lands of Central Europe, but which will also be a symbol of Jewish unity and the temple of Jewish glory, a task is presented on which many blessings rest. So that's the article. You also get this idea that I didn't mention before, this idea that Zionism, is linked to the sort of the benefit and the destiny of the British Empire. This idea that the Jewish state would still be sort of under British control, or at least would be receiving British support. So it's kind of unclear here, like what Churchill's visions were. Was this to be like a completely sovereign nation? Was it to be to continue to sort of be as like a British sort of suzerain, or a suzerain under British sovereignty? The specifics of this are not really well fleshed out here, but in any case, he does see, and this is of course not what happened in history, but he does see that there is this sort of continuing paternalistic relationship between Great Britain and the Jewish state. So it's kind of an interesting article. Hopefully this was edifying for some people. Thank you for watching.